going on, everybody? How y'all doing? Hopefully everybody's having a good Thursday. Getting a little bit more set up here. We'll be getting started shortly. Before we get into it, let's start with some updates. So, as you all might know, if you've turned into the program before, I will be going to Scotland for 2 weeks, starting on the 17th. So next week's episode on the 13th will be our last episode before my vacation. So hopefully y'all will be there, but if not, hey, we'll see you around. Now, when we go to Scotland, when I go to Scotland, we're going to produce some content from Scotland. It won't be live. It'll be produced after I get back and turned into some videos. We're going to visit some cultural sites. We're going to hopefully talk to some people on the street, get some ideas about what they feel like about American politics, and ask them what their opinions are about what's going on in the UK in terms of the whole EU fiasco, what's going on with the Scottish referendums, things of that nature. So yeah, we're hopefully to do some of that stuff while we're out there. There's also going to be some historical stuff talked about. We're going to do some of that. We're going to do it from my campsite. Hopefully I have enough battery juice and light to make that successful. But we're going to have a lot of different things about that. So we're hopefully going to come back with some good content from Scotland once I get back on the May 3rd. I'll be back May 3rd. And so we'll have our next episode on May 4th after that. Okay. What else we got? The date is wrong on screen. Ah, thanks, Nikki. That's easy to fix. There we go. There we go. Date's right on screen. So what else? What else we got going on? Well, we got, we're going to do some more essay content as well. So when we get back in May, we're going to produce an essay that hopefully will be done by the end of May. So we're shooting to have it completed by May 31st and published by then. That episode is going to be on AI, what it is, what it's not, what people should actually call it, what its ramifications are for our industry being streaming, and what creatives in general, and the kind of things that we might have to talk about with ethics around it and things of that nature. We're going to do a highly produced episode on that. Hopefully we'll have some good content with that. And actually we will have some good content with that. Don't know how long that essay will be. Probably about an hour, though. An hour's worth of content is what we're shooting for. Anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour long. A lot of good stuff on that. So be sure to be checking out that in May as well. We're also going to be restarting Cypher State in May. So Cypher State is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast where myself, generally speaking, Tiberius D, and our guest from various sides of the political spectrum come together to talk about issues facing the geopolitical stage. We've covered things such as the Libyan civil war, the elections in France, the elections in Germany, and the Tigrayan, the civil war in Ethiopia, rather, as well as some other places. So we're hopefully to start that back up in May as well, but I have to get with Tiberius on the exact date of when we're going to restart that. If I had to guess, I'd say probably the 14th, but yeah, that's what we're shooting for. So we're going to happily have that started back up as well. But yeah, with that, let's go ahead and get started with the News Roundup. All right, let's get started. Oh, we need to go to the top. All right. Last week, we preempted our weekly reporting on Russia's war in Ukraine to cover the news of the first ever indictment of a former US president. As a result, tonight we're catching up with significant coverage over the last 2 weeks about the war in Ukraine. The Guardian reported that a Moscow court formally arrested a Wall Street Journal reporter in relation to espionage allegations, according to Russian law enforcement agencies. Russia's top security agency, the FSB, said Evan Gershkovich was detained while allegedly trying to obtain classified information. The security service alleged that the reporter, quote, was collecting classified information about the activities of the enterprises of a Russian military-industrial complex. The Wall Street Journal said in a statement that it vehemently denies allegations of espionage. The arrest marks the first time a U.S. correspondent has been detained on spying accusations since the Cold War. This is the first criminal case of espionage charges against a foreign journalist in post-Soviet Russia. The correspondent covers Russia, Ukraine, and other ex-Soviet nations in the Wall Street Journal's Moscow bureau. He could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted of espionage. The FSB noted that the reporter had accreditation from the Russian Foreign Ministry to work as a journalist, but a ministry spokeswoman said that he was using his credentials as cover for, quote, activities that have nothing to do with journalism. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that, quote, it is not about a suspicion, it is about the fact that he was caught red-handed. Based on reporting today, a Moscow court will consider an appeal by lawyers for the correspondent to lift his pretrial detention. The hearing on April 18th will be held behind closed doors, since Russia considers information related to the charges as in of themselves classified, the Interfax news agency reported, citing the court's press services. Furthermore, in other Russian news, Putin is preparing his citizens for a quote-unquote forever war, according to The Guardian. During Putin's State of the Nation speech last month, the Russian leader repeated some of the many grievances he holds against the West. The thinly veiled message to the people was that the war in Ukraine would not be ending anytime soon, and that Russians must learn to live with it. One Western diplomat in Moscow described Putin's message in the speech as preparing the Russian public for a war that never ends. The diplomat also said that it was not clear that Putin could accept a defeat in the conflict because it did not seem that Putin could, quote, understand how to lose. Putin is personally making operational and tactical decisions and has stopped discussing the war in his public comments. These omissions reflect the Kremlin's uneasy acceptance that it's unable to change the course of the war on the battlefield, argued Vladimir Gilman, a Russian politics. Sorry. Let me restart that. These omissions reflect the Kremlin's uneasy acceptance that it is unable to change the course of the war on the battlefield, argued Vladimir Gilman, a Russian politics professor at the University of Helsinki. Quote, it's easier not to talk about the war efforts when your army is making no progress, Gilman added. Over the winter, Western military analysts and Ukraine officials repeatedly warned that Russia, after drafting 300,000 men last fall, would mount a major new attack. But Moscow's offensive across the 160-mile arc in eastern Ukraine, which started in February, has brought the country minimal gains at staggering cost. Western officials have estimated that there has been up to 200,000 killed or injured on the Russian side. Quote, Russia simply does not have the offensive capabilities for a major offensive, said U.S. military expert Rob Lee. According to Lee, less than 10% of the Russian army in Ukraine is capable of offensive operations, with the majority of its troops now conscripted with limited training. Continuing on, he quoted that stated that, quote, continuing on, he said, quote, their forces can slowly achieve a few grinding victories, but do not have the capacity to punch through the Ukrainian defense lines in a way that would change the course of the war. In other news, an unusual comment by an official suggests China may be repositioning itself on the war, according to reporting from Sky News. The news in mid-March that a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping might lead to an alliance against Ukraine and ultimately the West may have been overstated. In fact, in the past 24 hours, the first seeds of peace talks later this year may have been sown as French President Emmanuel Macron visited China, according to military analyst John Bell. The Chinese ambassador to the EU has taken the rare step of saying his country, quote, does not support the war and is not supplying weapons to Russia. Bell was referring to comments that the ambassador made to the New York Times, which he said were very unusual declarations. Quote, that's a very forthright statement that China normally does not clarify. It looks like China is trying to re-establish itself as an intermediary, he said. Continuing on, quote, that would suit China's domestically as well as its global standing. Sorry. Continuing on, he stated, quote, that would suit China's domestic policy as well as its global standing significantly. We are a long way from what at that moment, but I think we are starting to see some indications of the dominoes just starting to line up. He said that one of those dominoes was present on the sidelines of Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to Poland yesterday, when senior advisors softened their approach to Crimea, saying that if the spring offensive succeeds, then Ukraine would be willing to talk with Russia about the peninsula. Up until now, Ukraine has held a very firm line that it will not engage with Vladimir Putin until Russia has vacated Crimea, which it annexed in 2014. Chinese Ambassador Fu Hong said as an Chinese Ambassador Fu Kong gave an interview to the New York Times before Macron's visit to China this week. Critics had misinterpreted China's relationship to Russia, he said, downplaying the two countries' previous declaration of no-limits friendship. He also said that China will not give Russia arms to use in Ukraine, now or in the future, and strongly criticized Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, for saying in February that China was considering sending Moscow military aid. One thing that we need to emphasize here is the fact that President Zelensky's visit to Poland yesterday had softened their approach to Crimea specifically, saying that there is room to talk about what is and will not become of Crimea. On this program, I have specifically said that I could see President Zelensky and the West basically saying, okay, Russia, you can keep Crimea. Just get rid of everything else. And, well, if this reporting is accurate and these things are what he's saying is accurate, and by that I mean going through with it after, making gains in eastern Ukraine, we might actually see that happen. Now, I've been discussed with other analysts that maybe Russia isn't really willing to just keep Ukraine simply because not having a land bridge to Ukraine, land bridge through Ukraine to Crimea rather, is very difficult to maintain and keep Crimea in line and connected to the rest of Russia. There's the bridge that connects the two and, the ability for ferries to go back and forth and things like that. But it would be much easier for Russia to keep control of Crimea and deliver military equipment and everything else if they had a land bridge connecting to Crimea, which would have to go through eastern Ukraine, as the territorial integrity of Ukraine, even now with Russia occupying large swaths of eastern Ukraine, would still have to keep the parts of eastern Ukraine. So it might not happen, but the fact that these talks are coming up with China and France and others trying to push Ukraine to some sort of resolution and trying to get Russia on the table as well might give it more credence than we originally had thought. So yeah, that's what we're going to be seeing here. So let's continue though. In other news, Armenia, a longtime ally of Russia, said that Russian President Vladimir Putin would be arrested if he visited the country, according to local media. That's pretty huge. Wow. So based on reporting from Business Insider, Armenia, a longtime Russian ally, has been increasingly distancing itself from Vladimir Putin. The party was referring to an international arrest warrant for Putin issued earlier this month by the International Criminal Court. In an interview with the news outlet Factor.am, the deputy of the Armenian National Assembly, the country's ruling party, said this week that if Putin were to travel there, he should be arrested, according to a translation by the Daily Beast. Quote, "It is better for Putin to stay in his country," the deputy said, according to the translation. Continuing on, quote, "If we enter into the agreements, then we must fulfill our obligations. Let Russia solve its problems with Ukraine." A spokesperson for the Kremlin did not immediately respond to insiders' request for comment. Armenia is among a growing group of countries that have said they would enforce an international warrant issued by the ICC. Germany, Ireland, Austria, Croatia, among others, have already said they would enforce the warrant, while the UK and France did not comment on whether they would commit to arresting the Russian leader. And finally, Finland has formally been welcomed into NATO as its 31st member just this past Tuesday, doubling the length of the Transatlantic Defense Alliance's land border with Russia. Sweden is also set to join this alliance. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday that, quote, "It is NATO that is expanding towards Russia, not Russia that is taking its military infrastructure towards the border of NATO." Kind of true. It did invade Ukraine, though, which put everybody on edge and made Finland and Sweden want to join NATO. So it's kind of getting the blowback that you would expect. Furthermore, he added that Russia would keep an eye on any NATO military deployments. Furthermore, he stated that he would keep an eye on any NATO military deployments to Finland and respond accordingly. But with that, my friends, that concludes our reporting on Ukraine. We see you in chat, everybody. So, hey, Provo Kid, appreciate you. This is a fresh stream. Yes, we've been streaming for a bit of time here. We've been doing this for, 2 years now? About almost every Thursday for 2 years. Been a long time. But we are not that well known, so we appreciate you jumping in and giving our stream a little looky-loo. Appreciate you. Now, if you were just joining us, this is the News Roundup. We do this every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, covering the news that was the last week with the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. We do it, like I said, every Thursday, unless stated otherwise. We do other things, like we mentioned at the top of the show, which is we're going to do essays. We do Cipher State, which is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast, among other projects, which you can find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast streaming service. But let us continue on now. We have to talk about U.S. politics. This is a U.S.-based show. We're going to focus mainly on U.S. politics. Let's get to it. So Congress left town last Thursday for a 2-week break. So not much to report in U.S. politics this week, specifically with Congress. However, there's a little bit to cover. One of those things is Taiwan. So reporting from NBC News and The Independent state that Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen met with a bipartisan congressional delegation yesterday at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. The meeting marked the highest profile encounter between U.S. and Taiwanese leaders on American soil since the end of formal diplomatic relations in 1979. Speaker Kevin McCarthy promised the Taiwanese president unwavering support for Taiwan. If only he would have that same unwavering support for Ukraine. I guess, though, that the Republicans really want to take on China a lot. They want to do some fighting on China on this one. But yeah, we're gonna see what happens here. But let's continue. The meeting reaffirmed American support for the Taiwanese government and emphasized the importance of continuing arms sales and economic cooperation with Taiwan. In her remarks, Tsai noted that the importance of a relationship between the United States and Taiwan, adding the presence and support of the delegation during her trip would, quote, reassure the people of Taiwan that we are not isolated and we are not alone. Now, why do we have this relationship with Taiwan? Well, it sticks in the craw of China, so that's a big one. But more importantly, it is the fact that Taiwan has integrated itself into the international economy, specifically with computer chip manufacturing. We've reported on this program before that the chips manufacturing that Taiwan does is the best in the world. And if China were ever to get complete and total control over Taiwan and its chip manufacturing, it would put America and anybody else at a comparative disadvantage, especially if those chips were not allowed to be exported from Taiwan, or if those chips that are used in high-grade military equipment fell into Chinese military's hands, and thus improving their capabilities to fight the United States. Over the last 60 years or so, part of the primary focus of the U.S. has to maintain military advantage, asymmetry military advantage with the rest of the world. And part of that has come around due to the chip revolution that started around 1980s with condensing chips to put, at this point, it's billions of transistors onto a tiny, tiny little chip. The chip in your computer has more processing power, more transistors on it than the computers that sent man to the moon. And those things are used in guidance munitions, satellite technology, and pretty much any kind of communication equipment that we have in the entire world. So that is primary why the United States is worried about Taiwan. Also, why the United States passed the CHIPS Act, and why we are trying to bring chip manufacturing back to American shores. How that will go and whether or not it will be good, or whether it'll be good if it happens, but how good it being will depend on how much infrastructure is built and how many manufacturing plants are created in the United States. But we have to continue on. Now, China, for its part, responded by staging warships in waters around Taiwan and warned of resolute action. Saber rattling, gotta wag the saber, gotta show that they're gonna fight for their right to keep Taiwan in their orbit. And, it's to be expected. I mean, China has built fake islands across the South China Sea and all the like. So this is to be expected. And China, over the last 20 or 30 years or so, has established a large contingent of highly nationalistic people in its country in order to foment's the wrong word, foster, that's a better word, in order to foster a more devote population to the CCP. And so if they don't respond with military saber rattling here, then, well, they could actually piss off their own people and maybe lose a little control. That's why we're seeing this. And thank you, Provo. Appreciate you. Yeah, this is what we do. So good that you're liking it. Now, for Taiwan's part, Taiwan's Minister of Defense said this morning that the 3 warships were detected in waters separating the island from mainland China. The Defense Ministry also said that an anti-submarine helicopter had crossed the island's air defense identification zone. The air defense identification zone is like, let's see, how to describe this. So many miles off the coast is where Taiwan is, like, if China comes here, because Taiwan's really close to China, right? So if a ship or any military kind of thing, so helicopters, planes, ships, whatever, enter that territory, cross that line, that is considered its identification zone. And that is where it goes on to possible alert should anything pop off. I don't know exactly where it's at, like how many nautical miles it is from the shore, but that is what they're talking about here, just to give you some clarity. Continuing on, though, earlier on Wednesday, Taiwan said that it was keeping a close watch after a Chinese aircraft carrier was also spotted off the Taiwan coast. China views any interaction between the US and Taiwan as a challenge to its territory claim of the island and breaking the One China policy. It also staged war games around Taiwan last August after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taipei. In a statement today, the Chinese Foreign Ministry promised to take resolute and effective measures. Quote, in response to the serious, erroneous acts of collusion between the United States and Taiwan, China will let's start over. Quote, in response to the seriously erroneous act of collusion between the US and Taiwan, China will take resolute and effective measures to safeguard national sovereignty and territorial integrity, the Chinese foreign minister was quoted as saying by the Global Times. Continuing on, quote, the Taiwan issue is the core of China's core interest and first red line in the Sino-US relations that cannot be crossed, the Chinese foreign ministry said. Finally, quote, Taiwan's independence is incompatible with cross-strait peace and stability, and it is a dead end. Now, this all from a Chinese perspective, from a very Chinese perspective, especially from the CCP, this all makes perfect sense. Taiwan has always been a part of China. After the Chinese Civil War, shortly after World War II, the communists routed the nationalists, and the nationalists went to safety in Taiwan. Right? So that's the Nationalist Party of China. And they both claim to be the one true representation of China, right? As far as international relations are concerned. However, due to the Communist Party's effective use of military force in World War II and after World War II, talking about Korea and, well, not so effective. It was in Korea, it was effective, but not so effective in Vietnam. Everybody recognized the Chinese Communist Party as being the one true representation of China. But because of China's tenuous position in world order and its need to kind of integrate itself as well as shape the entire Chinese population to be more Chinese communist or whatever you want to call what they are, they couldn't make a full military effort against Taiwan, especially after the United States helped bolster it as an independent country. Although it's not considered an independent country, for all intents and purposes, it is self-administered, it runs itself, it has its own military, it does global trade outside of the Chinese government's will. It is for all intents and purposes a separate country, right? So that's how we got to this where we are. That's how they're able to be the manufacturing hub for computer chips in the world, as well as other manufacturing goals, and how it has representation in various international bodies to some extent, as well as, basically running its own affairs. China, for its part, has not tried yet, anyways, to directly influence Taiwan through military might or taking over and things like that. What they have done is they have gone into Taiwan, set up spies, they've set up non-government organizations, they've fostered communist parties inside Taiwan and other political parties that are more favorable to China. And those parties have won elections and increased, relations with China and other things. So what we will likely see, at least for the time being, is that to continue on, as well as China to try to influence its neighbors. So we're talking Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, Vietnam. What else? A lot of the countries that surround China that are Western focused. They'll also try to influence those countries to be more amenable to what China wants. And that includes trying to influence politicians to be like, well, Taiwan probably should just be part of China fully. So that's what we can expect. Now, but for their part, the White House was careful to walk a delicate diplomatic line ahead of Ty's visit, reiterating that the trip was perfectly routine and consistent with the U.S.'s policy toward Taiwan amid deteriorating relations between Beijing and Washington. But China doesn't see it that way. And, from their perspective, it is a reasonable position. I actually would say it's a reasonable position. But I also say that it is not a reasonable position for China to just it's a reasonable position for China to want to take over all of Taiwan, but it's not a moral one, given that Taiwan has been effectively an independent country for the greater part of 60 years. We're going on 70 here. So, yeah, that's what we're having. But that, my friends, concludes our segment about Taiwan and US. So we have a little bit of an update from the Senate, and that includes health updates about John Fetterman. So Senator Fetterman was released from Walter Reed Hospital just this week. excuse me, where the Pennsylvania Democrat had been undergoing treatment for depression. He is expected to return to work when Congress goes back into session. There's no update about the return of California Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein, who was hospitalized last month for complications due to shingles. Senator Minority Leader Mitch McConnell continues to recover from a fall last month that we now know caused a severe concussion. There are no recent updates on when the Kentucky Republican may return as well. A lot of old people in the Senate, and old people have old people things happen to them. Shingles, falling, concussions, etc. John Fetterman's a little bit of a special case, but we wish them good health. And, even though we might not like people, we're not going to wish them ill, physical damage, etc. But that concludes that part. All right. So, sorry about that, if you heard all those crackings. We do have to continue on. So we're going to continue now with some SCOTUS updates. First up, we have a civil rights tester's oral argument. This was preempted last week. So let's go ahead and turn over now to SCOTUS blog, give us the rundown, and I'll inject my own opinions into it as it happens. Let's go. Make sure it's popped up correctly. All right, cool.
Today, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a case about civil rights testers. Those are people.
Restart that. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, let's restart. All right.
Today, the Supreme Court agreed to hear a case about civil rights testers. Those are people who search hotel websites, in this case, looking for failure to provide details about accessibility for people with disabilities.
So civil rights testers aren't just a ADA kind of thing. These are people that basically go into any establishment, whether it's hotels, real estate, restaurants, etc., and make sure that they are following the Civil Rights Act, the ADA, and other legislation revolving around civil rights. So this is perfectly normal. It's how we end up finding out a lot about whether or not an organization, company, individual is violating people's civil rights. So that's what is going on here.
Now, the question is whether those testers actually have the right to sue if they never plan on actually visiting the hotel. That's called standing, and if that sounds familiar, it should. It has come up recently several times in the student loan case, the Texas SB 8 abortion case, plenty of others. It's important. Courts in the United
So she'll explain this a bit, but it's really important to understand this. So the whole idea here is that in order to be able to sue, you have to have had an injury. And if you didn't intend to stay at the hotel, then you likely didn't actually suffer an injury, which means you weren't actually prevented from exercising a right or, something else happening, right? Which is why the Supreme Court, this is not just for civil rights, it's for everything. It's why the Supreme Court, basically kicked out some of the cases in regards to the student loans issue with Biden for giving student loans, because there wasn't any actual injured party with that, or at least the injury was so ephemeral that it couldn't actually be followed through legally. So that's what we're seeing here. I'm gonna let you continue.
United States don't just think about policy matters and issue advisory opinions. People can't just waltz into court if they don't like a law or someone they think is breaking the law. In the United States, to sue, you have to show that you were injured and that a favorable ruling from the court can redress that injury. So in this case, Deborah Lawfer has brought 600 lawsuits against hotels around the United States. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, hotels are required to make available information about accessibility for people with disabilities on their reservation portals. So in this case,
So to give a little bit more information about this, when talking about accessibility, we're talking about wheelchair access, braille, other things like that for blind people, deaf people, elevators to reach higher floors, assistance, that sort of thing.
Who has physical disabilities and vision impairments, sued in federal court in Maine, where she says an in-run by Atchison Hotels didn't have enough information on its website about the accommodations that it has for people with disabilities. Now, the hotel says she doesn't have standing to sue because she never intended to stay there. And the lower court split on whether she has standing. And now the Supreme Court will decide next term.
So yeah, that's what we're seeing for this civil rights case. There is other additional information about this, and that is we are seeing updates about the April court. So I'm going to make sure that this is the right. Yeah. Okay. So breaking this afternoon, reported by The Sun, the Supreme Court declined to overturn. And actually, let's let this. Ignore that. I'll cut it in the thing, but let's go ahead and let SCOTUS blog give us a little update on this before we get into it.
It's April, the final month of regularly scheduled arguments at the Supreme Court, and it means we're in the final countdown before the Supreme Court takes its summer recess, usually at the end of June. Here are 3 things to know. We're still waiting for a decision on the emergency appeal out of West Virginia on the state's ban on transgender women and girls participating in public school sports.
Now, this case, we have additional information that we will cover shortly after this video is concluded.
The case has been fully briefed on the emergency docket for a couple of weeks now, so really, any day. Second, we don't have an opinion day until April 14th. That's pretty late considering we've only gotten 9 opinions so far this term, and one of them was a dig, so that doesn't even really count. They're hitting half of their ordinary pace by this time and way less compared to this time of year, going back every year to 1946, according to this graph from Adam Feldman.
Now, so this is important. The court can hear any number of different cases, and they're generally speaking, as you can see in this graph, pretty consistent with having a large amount of rulings, at least by court standards, right? But as you can see here, you can see there's a general trending down. I can't really tell. But there's been a general trend down probably since the 1970s, simply because that's when a lot of civil rights cases were done. But, you know, right here, the little bump right there, that is just falling off a cliff. Like the average here is like 10, 20 cases or so per session. So yeah, they're definitely not hearing as many cases. Why that's the case, I'm not sure. It's not like they're not having cases brought to them. They have a full staff. They appear to be, everybody that's on the Supreme Court as of right now appears to be fairly healthy. So I don't know what is actually going on. Maybe there are walking cases a bit slower due to the heightened political tensions that we have, the division in the country. But I'll let other court observers make those determinations. Well, let's go ahead and let her finish.
Third, we're still waiting on major decisions from argued cases on student loans, affirmative action, the future of the internet, and federal elections. Mark your calendar for April 14th and join us live. As always, we don't know which opinions we'll get or how many until that day.
Right. So yeah, that's the updates. Now, breaking this afternoon, as we said, and this is reported by The Sun, the Supreme Court has actually declined to overturn an appeals court order to let Becky Pepper Jackson participate on the girls' track and cross-country teams. She will be allowed to continue participating on her middle school girls' track team as a legal case challenging a state ban plays out. Pepper Jackson filed a lawsuit against a West Virginian law prohibiting transgender girls from competing in sports consistent with their gender identity. Supreme Court Justices Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas dissented in support of West Virginia's enforcing its law. Alito, in an opinion joined by Thomas, wrote that the dispute, quote, concerns an important issue that this court is likely to be required to address in the near future, particularly whether states can restrict participation in women's or girls' sports based on genes or psychological or anatomical characteristics. This was be seen by some court watchers as a test case that could have far-reaching effects on hundreds of anti-trans laws across the country that are predicated on girls' sports. So, my opinion on this is actually fairly nuanced. This is a middle school team. Honestly, it's a middle school team, and you guys shouldn't care. Even if you love sports, just love sports and want the integrity of sports, right? We're talking about middle school. We're talking about a time before many people even start puberty. Let's be real. Like, what, middle school age? Let me look that up real quick to make sure I'm not just misremembering middle school age. What, middle school's 12 to 14. So, just starting puberty. Not necessarily going full through it, depending on the state and birthday cutoffs and stuff like that. You're going to see anywhere between ages of 11, as young as 11, to like 14. And as Becca Fitchner, did I pronounce your name right? I'm sorry if I did not, but let me get that on screen. Nobody cares about girls' sports until trans girls want to play. Very true. Very true. And that's kind of my opinion on it as well. I don't see this as being a sports integrity issue necessarily, especially as more kids that are trans go on puberty blockers. I think it's a lot of people just trying to enforce their cultural, ideological underpinnings on people. And then there is a smattering, well, maybe a little more than a smattering of people that are like, well, no, like, boys are stronger than girls. We don't want, it's benevolent misogyny. We don't want men beating up on women in sports, right? It's that kind of thing, right? That's a lot of it. But with this one in particular, it's cross country. A lot of places it's track and cross country, right? A lot of places don't even have or they have co-ed teams for this. This should be such a non-issue that I don't think anybody should really care about it. Now, with what the Supreme Court is doing here, they're just not overturning the lower court's decision. They're not making a decision either way, though. They're letting it play out in more court cases. So what essentially is that somebody sued, and they're trying to get it to skip the regular going through the entire chain process and try to skip to the Supreme Court earlier than what would actually have happened naturally, so to speak. And the Supreme Court simply said, no, we're not going to overturn that ruling. And then Alito and Thomas are 100% correct. These cases are going to make it to the Supreme Court. Title IX is going to be at issue here. This is where it's going to bend and break on it. One interesting thing, though, is that a other Title IX case ruled by Gorsuch that we reported on, it was like 2 years ago now. There was a case, I can't remember the exact case names, I can remember the details. I can't remember the name of the plaintiff and everything else like that, but I can remember the broad details. And in that case, it was a transgender woman that was being fired for wearing women's clothes by a mortuary, essentially. It might have been a coroner's office that worked for the state, but it was, they were doing embalming and things like that. And their boss tried to fire them for not dressing like a man because that was what they expected her to do. She sued, and Gorsuch actually wrote either the opinion or a concurring opinion, pretty strong written, basically saying you can't discriminate clothes, because if you were going to allow a woman, a cis woman, to wear things that are, deemed appropriate business attire, then you can't say a cis man can't wear the same clothing. Essentially is what he said. And so this case might play into that a little bit. Don't be surprised if there's some breakage here with some conservatives on this. A little bit more than one might expect. We could see that maybe they'd be like, no, they can participate, but you put an asterisk. There could be any number of different ways this case could actually pan out. So don't assume just because we have 6 nominally conservative justices on the court that case is going to be ruled in a way that is anti-trans women in sports. So I just want to state that. Now we have other news coming out of the Supreme Court. And that news is, of course, what I'm talking about is that juicy lobbying that everybody says doesn't happen at the Supreme Court, but it is an open secret that it actually is. So in a bombshell report came out today from ProPublica, we learned that Justice Clarence Thomas and his wife, conservative activist Ginny Thomas, has gone on several luxury trips involving travel subsidized by a GOP mega donor, as well as stays at properties the donor owns. The hospitality was not disclosed on Thomas's public financial filings with the Supreme Court, ProPublica discovered. The report of the connection between Thomas and conservative businessman Harlan Crow. The report of the connection between Thomas and conservative businessman Harlan Crow is already adding to calls that Congress investigate potential ethical lapses. Key Senate Democrats were previously mulling using this year's funding legislation for the Supreme Court to pressure the justices to adopt some sort of ethics code, which is something that this should just be illegal. Like, how is this not illegal? How is it not illegal for the Supreme Court justices to essentially take bribes? Like, oh, they're just no, this is lobbying. This is lobbying. Stop. Freaking ridiculous. And then it's not just Thomas. There's been gifts and awards given to Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Roberts. I'm sure that, I don't have any knowledge, but I'm sure it's happened to liberal justices as well in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if Amy Coney Barrett has something along this as well. I can say for certain that this has happened to Alito, Thomas, and Scalia previously, the late Scalia, because we've had direct reporting on this going back years that this is happening. And none of this should be legal. Full stop. This should all be illegal. It should be seen as bribery because it very closely and more than likely is. Or rewarding for like, hey, you ruled the way I wanted you to do. Here's some kickbacks. Or like, hey man, that case that you're hearing about coming up about some issue facing business, I don't think it should be done that way. Why don't you come to my abode and hear me out? Like, that's what's going on here. We know it's what's going on. And it shouldn't be. Continuing on. The new ProPublica report describes Thomas accepting travel hospitality from Crow that included lavish trips to Indonesia, New Zealand, California, Texas, and Georgia. ProPublica has also identified what appears to be several trips taken by Thomas on Crow's private jet that went undisclosed on his public ethics filing though one Thomas trip on Crow's jet was disclosed in 1997. I'm going to say that again. 1997. Holy crap. Holy crap. How is it? All right. I guess this is just what we do now. We just lobby Supreme Court. Now, what am I talking about? This is what we've been doing for at least 30 years. Lobbying Supreme Court justices. Unelected. Lifelong tenure. Super powerful. Make laws. Interpret laws. Supreme Court justices. Just getting all the money and perks for sitting in the high court. Jesus Christ. Now Thomas, nominated by former President George H.W. Bush in 1991, is the senior-most justice on the court and an intellectual leader of the current 6-3 conservative majority. The justice has also been the subject of scrutiny for the political activities of his wife, including for texts she exchanged with key players in the former President Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election. This is not just January 6th that we're mentioning here. This is about the slate of secondary electors and all this lawsuits and everything else. Crow, a Dallas businessman, because of course he's from fucking Texas, with deep connections to Republican politics, because again, Texas, has contributed more than $10 million in publicly disclosed political contributions. Publicly disclosed. You know what? I'm going to go later on. There's a website that a great data analyst from Texas, an accountant, put together that shows all the money that flows through Texas politics. And I bet if I look this guy up, he's involved in all the Texas money as well. Jeez. Additionally, the ProPublica reported documents. Additionally, ProPublica report documents. Sorry, this is just weirded. I'm sorry. I'm getting tongue-tied. Additionally, ProPublica has reported that documents paint a picture that hangs at the Crow's Adirondacks property depicting Thomas Crow and other influential figures in Republican politics, including Leonard Leo, the former Federalist Society head who played a critical role in Trump's makeover of the federal bench. The report revealed that executives of major corporations, as well as heads of prominent conservative organizations, have been in attendance on trips with Crow that Thomas has also joined. This is a giant lobbying effort. Giant. Thomas did disclose in his filing in 2001 a $19,000 Bible that belonged to Frederick Douglass that was gifted to him by the Crow family. That's a nice little gesture. That's cool. That's cool. Just $19,000 historical document that one of a kind can't prove anything. My God. Jeez. Jeez. Okay, $19,000 one-of-a-kind Bible. All right, cool. Cool story. Additionally, ProPublica describes a portrait of the justice and his wife given to him by Crow, as well as donations by Crow's foundation of $105,000 for a Justice Thomas Portrait Fund at Yale Law School, where Thomas is an alumnus. Oh, you're going to have $105,000 spent on portraits to this man. Okay. You know what? When all you have is legacy and ego, that's ridiculous. And yes, we do appreciate the follow, Provo Kid. Appreciate it. Crow, though, in a statement to ProPublica, acknowledged that he has made, quote, contributions to projects celebrating the life and legacy of Justice Thomas, just as we have done with other great leaders and historically significant figures. I'm not trying to bribe the man. I'm trying to honor him. He's such a great man. Sure, buddy. We believe you. He said that neither Thomas nor his wife asked for the contributions. Well, duh. If they openly asked for it, then that would be soliciting a bribe, and that is actually illegal. But, you know, taking gifts at the Supreme Court, that's not illegal, I guess. I don't know. So this report comes not long after the federal judiciary's policy-making body quietly adjusted its interpretation of what justices are required to disclose as part of their transparency obligation. Okay. There shouldn't be any questions about what should and shouldn't be considered a ethics violation. These things should be written into the law. And it should be not interpretable by the Supreme Court if that law is or is not legal, to be honest with you, because it personally affects them. We need to have a standard for elected and unelected officials that is consistent and helps prevent bribery and other uncouth actions. We want a system set up that actually engenders trust into our polity, into our politics, and anything that is contrary to ensuring that trust is maintained is against the public's interest. That is why these kind of things should just be illegal. The First Amendment doesn't protect you from unethical, or doesn't protect you from being held accountable for unethical actions. But with that, my friends, that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Now, if you have news you want to see us cover on this program, or if you'd like to join one of our panels, here's how to let us know. First up, you can join the Discord. We have a Discord server, links above or below, depending on how you're viewing this, where we like to have, post memes and a bunch of other different things. We have some talks in there, some high-level talks with people of different political stripes, although mostly right now we have a little bit of a lefty bend with the people that actually participate actively within our Discord. But yeah, you can join our Discord and get a hold of us there. You can also join, I know this is weird, but we do have a Facebook group. You can join us at Facebook.com/groups/Tribune Comments. And you can still get a hold of me via Twitter, despite the fact of what is posted on the Twitter there at Crowdsource Poll. But if you do Mastodon, and I'm using Mastodon a bit more often now, you can find me at CSPCipher at federated.press if you use Mastodon. But now, let us go ahead and continue on with the program. And now we have updates about the Trump indictment. So yeah. Oh, first, before that, maybe it's me. Hey, glad you brought a Bud Light, and Jack for all cheers. Yes, we will be getting into that later in the program. So glad you're joining us again. All right. But we have updates now on the Trump indictment. So as we reported at length last week, former President Donald Trump was indicted in New York City in connection with hush money payments to an adult film actress called Stormy Daniels. On Tuesday, he became the first U.S. president in history to be arrested and arraigned. Trump was fingerprinted. Trump was fingerprinted and processed ahead of his arraignment. CBS News reported that Trump pled not guilty to 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Those 34 counts were all in relation to the same action, separate instances of committing a crime around the same thing. The indictment was unsealed in a proceeding before Judge Juan Merchan in criminal court in Manhattan. Trump was flanked by his lawyers inside the courtroom as prosecutors outlined their case, alleging he made covert and illegal payments to effect the 2016 election, as you can see here. Trump faces a maximum of 4 years in prison for each of those counts if convicted. Prosecutor Chris Conroy told the court that Trump engaged in an illegal conspiracy to aid his campaign and undermine the election. The statements of facts compiled by prosecutors in conjunction with the indictment said that Trump, quote, repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York business records to conceal criminal conduct that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 2016 presidential election. It outlined 3 people who received hush money payments: adult film star Stormy Daniels, Playboy model Karen McDonald, and former Trump Tower doorman who had claimed to have a story about a child Trump had out of wedlock, a love child, while he was married to another woman. Daniels was paid $130,000 by former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen, while McDowell and the doorman were paid $150,000 and $30,000 respectively by AMI, the publisher of the National Enquirer. As we've reported previously, and some stuff that you should know, the AMI, this AMI scheme was basically a catch and kill story. So what they would do is they would find any story that was related to Trump that might paint him in a bad light, pay the person for that story, put them under a non-disclosure agreement, offer them large sums of money, and then never publish the story. So they bought exclusive rights to the story, gave them money, never published the story. I don't think this should be legal. If you have negative information about any politician, it should come out. You shouldn't be able to pay for that story and have it just disappear. That's not currently the law. So that's not what Trump's being charged with here. What he's being charged with is basically doing this and lying about it in an effort to make the public unaware of it. And since that is influencing political stuff, that raised his misdemeanor counts of the falsifying business records to a felony. Continuing on, The indictment said the falsified records Trump signed off on were all made in 2017 when he was president. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg said that the false statements were, quote, made to cover up other crimes, including violations of New York election law and federal campaign finance limits. Conroy also told the judge that prosecutors were very concerned about Trump's inflammatory social media posts about Bragg, other prosecutors, and the judge, saying that it could have an impact on jury and witnesses. If you didn't know, Trump was calling these judges anti-Trump, that they are entirely like bad people and they need to be held accountable and this is a travesty to our country, that sort of stuff. So that's what he's saying. Trump's attorney, Todd Blanche, told the judge that his client is frustrated and upset and was simply exercising his First Amendment rights. You know, that's true, but I mean, with power comes responsibility, and Trump is not adhering to any of the things that are responsible. But the judge said he was unconvinced that Trump's language was just frustration. He said the defense team should tell Trump to refrain from making statements that are likely to incite violence or civil unrest, acknowledging that Trump's words have a ton of weight. He told prosecutors to do the same with their witnesses. So we could see possibly an injunction being made, a gag order of some sort to hold anybody accountable to make statements that are inflammatory, inciting violence, generally talking, defamatory statements about the judge, those kind of things to come up from this case, which should happen, honestly. Hundreds of pro and anti-Trump demonstrators gathered in small parks from the courthouse ahead of the scheduled appearance. Protesters were outnumbered by the mass of international news media that descended on the area around the courthouse, including reporters from Brazil, Germany, France, Finland, and Sweden. The judge is said to have received dozens of death threats and threats of violence in recent days. Similar threats have been received by District Attorney Alvin Bragg and other people involved with this case. Because apparently that's just what we do in this country. If something happens to a political person we're going to threaten violence. Because we are violent people. And that's what we do. After returning to Mar-a-Lago, the president gave a post-arraignment speech, as reported by the Palm Beach Post. He checklisted American carnage issues like the chaotic military withdrawal from Afghanistan and choking inflation. And he rattled off long-standing grievances about the record-setting 2 impeachments as president. Trump also had plenty of over-the-top assessments of current events, concluding that the country is going to hell. Now, this is a thing that a lot of people are pushing in right-wing media, that we are a nation of decline. You have seen me posting on social media. You have seen that I have said explicitly that it always seems to be funny that whenever a Democrat is in office, Republicans always lament, oh no, we're losing the country. This isn't the country I've lived in anymore. And whenever a Republican is in office, no matter how milquetoast that person is, a lot of liberals and leftists say the same thing. Have some fucking have some perspective, please. People, please. Hey, Tam, thanks for joining the stream. However, the bulk of the speech was aimed at attacking the investigators themselves. And despite the clear warning from the judge regarding rhetoric, the former president continued his attacks on the judge's wife, and even the judge's daughter. He called Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg a criminal and labeled both New York Attorney General Tish James and Atlanta Area District Attorney Fani Willis a racist. And he said Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith was a radical left lunatic. Yeah, well, two black people representing Atlanta are racist because they're going after Trump. That's how egotistical this person is. Can you believe he was president? That's fucking wild. We are in truly the worst of timelines. And yeah, of course, anybody that goes after him is a radical leftist. Okay, there's some progressive prosecutors, some progressive DAs. I don't know if any of them are radical. So, might have to look up who this Jack Smith is later. And as we saw in last week's coverage, many MAGA-supporting members of Congress have publicly spoken in defense of the former president, once again failing to take the opportunity to unhitch their party from Trump. The Atlantic's Peter Wenner, a former speechwriter for George W. Bush, said it this way, quote, "In the past, wondering just how far a party would go in defense of its leader was a matter of speculation. But Trump has moved this question from the realm of speculation to the realm of reality. The GOP has hitched its wagon to Trump, and he is leading them to places even they never imagined. A grotesque man presides over a grotesque party." End quote. Yeah, so I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The case that we are seeing in New York isn't, when I say strongest of cases, that doesn't mean that the merits of the case aren't good. Doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of evidence that this has happened. It just means it's not like that, let's get them, like, yes, let's go, let's do it, this is happening level of a case. And that's because a lot of people just aren't going to care that a man paid off a mistress to keep her quiet. And at the end of the day, that's what this case was about. Should that have happened? Is that political meddling? No, it shouldn't have happened. Yes, it can be political meddling, but the majority of people are just not going to care, in my opinion. That said, I still think he should be held accountable, just like any other politician that breaks the law, and falsifying business records, especially in an area such as New York, where they are the financial capital of almost the entire world, rest. And so we need to have the accountability there. The more stringent cases, the ones that are happening in Georgia, which is where Trump called them, the prosecutors going after him, potentially there, racist, is the case that has more oomph to it. That is the case that is dealing with his phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State in order to find another 12,701 or so votes. You know, one more than President Biden had, in order to cinch the election for Trump in Georgia and stop Biden from becoming president. Whether or not Trump was just stupid and believed dumb shit about like election fraud or whatever, or was actually trying to use the power of his office to intimidate a Secretary of State in order to get what he wants, doesn't matter to me. Point is that as President of the United States, during an election, you should not be getting involved in state politics, especially around things like vote counting. You shouldn't be saying, hey, you know, I've heard these things, and it's going to be really bad for you if you don't do this thing. Get my drift? You don't act like a mob boss that's trying to sow plausible deniability so that you don't get in trouble for the things that you are clearly, to many people, doing. You just don't do it. You just don't do that sort of thing. And in knowing that, knowing what he said in Georgia, and knowing what happened, what transpired with the fake slate of electors, the pushes at other places such as Pennsylvania in order to sow distrust inside in the entire electoral process, is why, just as Nikki stated just now, they're considering RICO charges in Georgia. Because it was a conspiracy. There was an effort, a concentrated effort, to establish a second slate of electors and in order to overturn the results of the election. And to me, it doesn't matter if he truly believed that he was robbed or if he was being just a authoritarian leaning dickbag trying to subvert democracy. The point is that he did these things. And that should be beyond the pale. What is acceptable in American politics. If Obama had done something similar, we would not be having Republicans sitting here to try to make excuses for it. In fact, under Obama, when the FBI and other agencies were looking at people around Trump for talking to Russians, they said that this was a political witch hunt and they were out to get Trump to meddle in the elections. Despite the fact that none of that came into existence, into the public eye, until after the election. And Obama even went to the leaders of the Republican Party, leaders of both parties, rather. He talked to McConnell. He talked to, I think Kevin McCarthy was minority leader at the time in the House, Nancy Pelosi. He talked to the leaders and asked them to make a joint statement about Russian interference, and they said no. McConnell said no. And what happened? It wasn't revealed until after the election. So there you go. So if you are against anything happening around Obama, you should be against anything that's going on with Trump. Just should. Don't be a partisan. You shouldn't want the government, people in charge of government, doing these things. But with that concludes our segment about Trump. Now, we got a little bit of a fun one here, and this one's fun to us anyways, because it's rage bait, it's fine, it's funny, you know. What we're going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about the fact that Budwiser has gone queer. Yes, my friends, over the weekend, Anheuser-Busch sent a pack of Bud Light to a transgender woman and activist, Dylan Mulvaney, with her face on it. Mulvaney has been celebrating 365 days of girlhood, marking each day up to a year since undergoing her transition from man to woman. A whole bunch of random people lost their fucking minds over this. Let us go over to the Bird app now to talk about this properly. So we're gonna go ahead and just, maximize it, all right? So let's listen to this guy.
Hey Budwiser. I've been drinking your beer for probably 35 plus years. Not anymore.
Ow.
Y'all screwed up.
Coors Light. Yes, drink that beer. Drink the other beer. Fuck Budweiser. Now, I will say here that this is more than likely rage bait marketing in order to drum up support of Budweiser and get people spiting at it. And, if you just have enough controversy surrounding a product, everybody's talking about it. We're talking about it. Republicans are talking about it. Every single pundit on the planet has talked about this at this point. And it's funny. I just find this to be, just in general, hilarious. And our good friend of the show, Counterpoints, did say it best. And I'm going to pull that up here in a second. If I can find it. Where is it? This man tweets more than I do. Man, I can't find it. Okay, I can find it a different way. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna pull it up. Okay, we'll cut this out of the. Cut this out. That's what makes it funny. Here it is. This is a good one. All right, going back over to Bird app, and listen. You can sit me down and explain to me every possible alternative besides we put a gay person on our predominantly masculine-oriented product for rage marketing, and I simply won't believe you. And he's right. That's probably what this is, but that doesn't make it not hilarious. And so, let us watch a couple more of these so funny videos that our friends chuds of TikTok, the anti-conservative TikTok account or whatever, found, because these are all of them in the same vein.
Happening. But for Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light, all Bud products, you know me, you know how many of these get refilled in my fridge every week.
Well, they probably do know you, and yeah, they're hurting themselves a little bit. I will agree with you.
Coors,
Yep.
That would be my choice.
Coors will be his choice, right? So this goes on for a while. There's like, God, what is this? 14 videos of people just saying, I'm done with Budweiser. I'm drinking Coors now. Right? So why are we talking about this? Well, because it's funny that they're doing this over and they're going to Coors, but Coors also supports LGBTQ instances. Now, as you can see on the screen here, we have Lakota Man, Lakota Man, a Twitter activist and a real life activist, saying, MAGA, I'm switching to Coors Light. Coors, the fuck you are. And they have, of course, the ever so present rainbow flag on their Coors Light, celebrate everybody's identity with pronouns that go he, they, she, they, him, her, etc., they, them. And behold, the fact that Coors has since 1978 became the first brewer to initiate a non-discriminatory policy based on sexual orientation. You love to see it. You love to see it. So, yeah, that's just all kinds of hilarious. That's why we're going to talk a little bit more about it. So, Anheuser-Busch responded to this backlash in a statement to Fox News. The company explained that, quote, Anheuser-Busch works with hundreds of influencers across our brands as one of many ways to authentically connect with audiences across various demographics and passion points. And that's just what they're doing. They're rage bait marketing. They know that this will generate eyeballs, and they actually know that, well, the fact of the matter is they knew they did the investigation, they looked into the numbers, they did a little bit of data science on this, and came to the determination that they would not lose much money and probably gain a bit of money from the other side. With some comments from the audience. Maybe it isn't me coming with the great ones. Wait until Pabst Blue Ribbon, Milwaukee's Best, and even Evan Williams go woke. The bro mobiles will have to get sober. Lol. And so, yeah, I didn't know what that was either. So a bro mobile is a bro hillbilly hipster. That's funny. Kid Rock, Travis Twitt fans, etc. Hilarious. And then maybe it is me concluded his comments with funny shit is the Coors fans like the rapper Adam Collin chugging Coors despite Coors beating Bud to the punch. Yes, true. Coors has been there even longer than Budweiser. And yeah, I thought that was a little bit of a fun story. So that's why we decided to cover it. But that concludes this segment of that. Let us continue on now, though. Let us continue on and talk about some stuff that's a little more progressively leaning, so to speak. Because we have some news coming out of state politics that might be a bellwether for the future of progressive politics within the United States. And of course, I am talking about both the Wisconsin Supreme Court justice election and the Chicago mayoral election. So let's start with the Wisconsin Supreme Court election first. So a liberal Milwaukee County Circuit Judge, Janet Protasiewicz, won a seat on the Wisconsin Supreme Court this past Tuesday. The election was the most expensive state Supreme Court race in U.S. history, and one of the most closely watched elections of 2023. Democrats in the state and nationally described the race as the most important one in the country this year. Messaging during the campaign emphasized abortion rights and fair elections. These issues were a central focus in the National Party strategy last year to prevent a red wave in the House and keep the Senate. Ben Wilker, the chair of the state Democratic Party, tweeted that the race was, quote, a release valve for 12 years of Democratic rage in Wisconsin about Republicans rigging our state and smashing our democracy. And the reason why he said that is because Wisconsin is gerrymandered so much that over, what is it? Like, I want to say it's like 80% of the House districts, South seats, and a super majority in the Senate are Republican, despite the fact that Wisconsin is pretty much a 50-50 state. So let me look up that really quick. So Wisconsin House makeup. Yeah, out of 132 seats, 99 representatives, 33 senators. Republicans have 21 Senate. Democrats have 11. In the Assembly, so the House, Republicans have 64 and Democrats have 35. This is a state. This is a state where they pretty much are 50-50 when it comes to voting in. The Wisconsin senators right now, the Wisconsin senators, I want to say there's one Republican and one Democrat. Senators, Congress. Yeah, one senator, yeah, one Democrat and one, yep, 1 and 1. So yeah, so they've been gerrymandered to hell, and that's why Bill Wilker said what he said. So the win by sorry, I gotta getting tongue-tied again, by Protasiewicz suggests that the strategy continues to pay off for the party. A data point National Democrats will be all but certain to rely on heading into next year's presidential election. Ben Wilker, the chair of the state Democratic Party, we already said that. So her victory likely means that the end of a 1849 state abortion law and reversal of one of the most egregious gerrymanders in the country. The state Supreme Court is now a 4-3 liberal majority for the first time in 15 years. She was supported by Democrats in the race, which was technically nonpartisan. Hence, if you looked at any of these maps, it was like a yellow and pinkish color instead of red and blue. The judge defeated Republican-backed Daniel Kelly, a former member of the state's Supreme Court who holds far-right views. Kelly's defeat was a symbolic rejection of the former president, as Kelly advised the GOP on plans to take fake electors cast ballots for Trump following his 2020 loss to Biden. Hey, those fake electors are coming to bite them in the ass. And Wisconsin's legislative maps currently provide a 6-2 Republican hold of the state's congressional seats. This election is likely to change that gerrymandered ratio to a more competitive 4-4 alignment, as the liberal justices on these Supreme Courts and Democrats in general tend to not favor very huge, stark gerrymandering as much as Republicans do as a group. That doesn't mean that Democrats don't favor it. You know, we had who was Obama's secretary? Yeah, we have Eric Holder. Yeah, so Eric Holder is very much a like blue map kind of guy, very much like let's leverage the political powers that the Supreme Court gives us in order to, you know, create legislative majorities. But a lot of Democrats, especially liberals and lefties, aren't for that. So by and large, there's a little bit more schism there. In previous statements, though, the new justice described the state's maps as being rigged to the point that she did not believe you could sell to any reasonable person that the maps are fair. Turnout in the election was high, and turnout by younger voters was specifically so. Wisconsin, and that is because Gen Z actually turned out in higher numbers than previous generations at their age. We're seeing somewhat of a little bit of a political awakening happening younger in people. Typically speaking, people don't start to vote until roughly 24 years old or so. Generally speaking, probably closer to 30, which is why 18 to 24-year-olds are a small portion of the vote. There are a small portion of them vote, you know, anywhere between, I want to say it's like 20, or like it's been like 15% to like 20%. We're seeing that go as high as 30% now. Not everybody is voting, mind you. There's still a lot of work to do there to get people to be engaged in the political process and ways that we actually shape how society is formed and functions, but it is more than previously. And if that edge continues, then the legislative victories for whoever gets that edge will continue as well. So Wisconsin is a state to watch closely now, though, because Republicans win in a special Senate election resulted in a supermajority in the chamber, meaning the Senate now has the power to impeach state officials, including Supreme Court justices. Man, if you want to see some crap happen, just let them just expel this justice or any of the liberal justices on the court for very minor reasons, or no reason at all. That could be a problem. Now let us continue on in this segment to the Chicago mayoral race. And the mayor is now a progressive Democrat. So in Chicago's mayoral election on Tuesday, the choice was between progressive Democrat Brandon Johnson and conservative Democrat Paul Vallas. PBS News reported that the race pitted former Chicago school CEO Vallas, who was endorsed by Chicago's police union and major business groups, against progressive Brandon Johnson, a former teacher and union organizer backed by the Chicago's teachers union. They advanced to the runoff after finishing ahead of current mayor Lori Lightfoot in a February election, making her the first incumbent in 40 years to seek re-election in the city and lose. The contest centered on the increase in violent crime during the COVID-19 pandemic and soaring property taxes. Tuesday's results will have implications for Democrats nationally ahead of other elections, including mayoral races in cities such as Philadelphia and Houston. For both progressives and the party's more moderate ring, the Chicago race was viewed as a test of organizing power and messaging, especially with issues specific to big cities, like crime and alignment with law enforcement unions. The former teacher won the election by a margin of less than 20,000 votes, making this city's closest mayoral race in over 40 years. He inherits a city that has been grappling with high levels of crime for many years, particularly violent crime. Johnson told CBS Mornings that investing in people is the key to reducing crime in the city. He said he believes there is a direct correlation between youth unemployment and violence, and reducing both reducing one will reduce the other. And providing mental health services can also significantly reduce crime. And I believe he is right on these things. If people do not have jobs, they're more likely to be involved in some sort of crime in order to make a living or, get what they can out of the system. And mental health has been poor mental health has been correlated to rise of aggression, which leads to a rise in crime, especially violent crime. Not being able to deal with one's emotions is kind of a thing that helps produce more crime and more violence. So if we tackle both of these things, youth unemployment and lack of mental health services, then reducing crime may be a result. He has been accused of being a pro defund the police, but not in the ways that a lot of people would actually say. He is for investing more money into these programs that will reduce crime while keeping police budgets not where they are necessarily, but not like gutting them like some people want with defund the police. So yeah, we are going to be paying attention to what happens in Chicago over the next couple of years. And as it develops, we will let you know. Same in Wisconsin. But that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Excuse me. Okay. Let us continue on now here. And now we are going to move on to Tennessee. And the things that are happening in Tennessee are complicated. They're complicated. I have thoughts about what is happening to the legislators that are in Tennessee that are being expelled as we speak. But we're going to talk about that. And the reason we're going to talk about it is because this is something that probably shouldn't happen, but it's also something that a lot of people are maybe not informed about. Let's get into it. So according to Reuters and Business Insider, Republicans who control the Tennessee House of Representatives voted today on whether to expel 3 Democratic members for their role in a gun control demonstration at the State House last week. The expulsion vote would lead to the ouster of Representative Gloria Johnson, Justin Jones, and Justin Pearson. Last Friday's protest saw hundreds of demonstrators flood into the State House, 4 days after a Nashville school shooting ended with 3 9-year-old children and 3 school staff murdered. Pearson and Jones, both freshman lawmakers who had previously clashed with leadership on other issues this session, walked up to the House podium during a floor session and led the chants, echoing the shouts of protesters packed into the Capitol rotunda. The pair, later flanked by Johnson, grew frustrated as House leadership moved on the regular business just days after the mass shooting. The trio was accused of breaching decorum and floor rules for speaking at the House podium on March 30th without being recognized by the Speaker. This constituted an official breach of floor rules, which led House Speaker Cameron Sexton, a Republican, to recess the House and huddle with leadership for nearly an hour. Democratic leadership led the 3 off the floor, and they later continued on with House business. But within days, the lawmakers were stripped of their committee assignments and lost badge access to the legislative office building. In the resolutions calling for the expulsion, Republicans accused the 3 of engaging in disorderly behavior and said, quote, "They did knowingly and intentionally bring disorder and dishonor to the House of Representatives through their individual and collective action." Okay. Right. The Speaker of the House likened the trio's actions to January 6th. Okay. No. 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 They're not the same. Please, Republicans, I'm begging you. Conservatives, I'm begging you, stop making these connections. Because they're not in even the same vein of what is going on. Stop it. I understand that you think Jan 6, now you think that it was just a protest. It wasn't. It wasn't just a protest. There wasn't just people there saying, oh, we want a different democracy. It's not what was going on. Fights broke out. Police officers were beaten. A woman was killed for breaching the Capitol due to fears of people murdering politicians. This was 3 people and some others with a megaphone saying, we want gun reform. But what did he say? Well, he said the following. What they did today was equivalent, at least equivalent, maybe worse. Kill me. Depending how you look at it, to doing an insurrection in the state capitol. No, bro. You're full of shit. Stop. Please. My God. No. It's just not. It's not equivalent. It's just not. No one was murdered. There was no attempt for murder. There was a brief interruption. It was quickly resolved. Stop. No one was evacuated for their safety. Now, expelling someone from the Tennessee House of Representatives is a rare occurrence and requires 2/3 of members to vote in favor to expel someone. Republicans in the state control the House by a large margin. Of the 99 seats in the Tennessee House, 75 are held by Republicans, 23 by Democrats, and 1 is currently vacant. Only 2 members of the Tennessee House have been expelled over the last 175 years. One, according to CNN, was in 1980, after the body found the representative guilty of accepting a bribe. The second was in 2016 over sexual harassment allegations. No House member has ever been removed from elected office for simply violating decorum rules. Today, hundreds of demonstrators turned out today to protest the expulsion of the lawmakers. Let us watch some of those demonstrations now. Oh, and then as you can see, as you watch these 2 short videos, Check out the age demographics most represented. Go off the first video. So if you can't quite make it out, it says you ban books, you ban drag, but kids are still in body bags. All right, so that is video 1, and moving on to video 2. This is the same protest from a different angle. So if you can't quite make it out, they're saying free, 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 free the Tennessee 3. Alright. I'm pretty sure that's it. I don't think they walk out. Video. No. Alright. So let's end that there. Now we'll move on to a floor discussion from a video of Representative Jones defending themselves against expulsion. Defending all. So as you can see in the tweet here, we're going to zoom in a little bit. Tennessee State Representative Justin Jones, one of the Democrats that the GOP is trying to expel from the state legislature to protesting gun violence, calls out his colleagues on the floor. For years, one of your colleagues, an admitted child molester, sat in the chamber, no expulsion, among other things. So this is why I believe it is fully partisan, rather than it being anything about decorum, among other things. Let's listen to what he has to say. Take your time.
Let's talk about expulsion. For years, one of your colleagues, a child molester, sat in this chamber, no expulsion. One member sits in, found guilty of domestic violence, no expulsion. We had a former speaker sit in the chamber who is now under federal investigation, no expulsion. We have a member still under federal investigation, no expulsion. We had a member pee in another member's chair in this chamber, no expulsion.
Now, if you want to just say it's all about decorum and what you do to the house and make it look bad, that alone should be enough to convince you that this is just bullshit partisan fuckery. Right? The dude peed on another person's chair out of anger or some other bullshit, and they didn't get expelled. How is that not violating decorum? I want to know. Tell me. Explain it to me like I'm 5. I'm being serious. Like, this is stupid.
In fact, they're in leadership. But
there you go. Leadership.
So once again, what you're saying to us, that you're trying to put us on trial, I'll say what you're really on trial, state of Tennessee. You're really showing for the world is holding up a mirror to a state that is going back to some dark roots. State in which the Ku Klux Klan was founded, now attempting another power grab by silencing the 2 youngest Black representatives, one of the only women, Democratic women in this body. That's what this is about. Let us be real today.
And regardless of how you think about whether or not what he just said is accurate or not, you have to acknowledge that it is not an unreasonable position to have, given the facts that he just laid out about other people not being expulsed from the Tennessee legislature. So yeah, let's be super real with this and understand exactly what is going on here. This is partisan. At the very least, partisan. And just before 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Representative Justin Jones, who represented about 80,000 constituents, was expelled from Congress by a 75-25 vote, the first partisan expulsion in Tennessee history. In other words, no Democrat voted to expel Justin Jones. We have a 57-second reaction video provided by Mother Jones that we will watch about that now.
Tennessee elected by the 90th representative district, whereas Article 212 of the Tennessee Constitution provides that each house may determine the rules of these proceedings, punishes members for disorderly behavior, even to the occurrence of 2 letters expelled, but not a second time for the same offense.
That this is not, this should awaken to the world that there's no democracy in Tennessee, and that today's vote is a very dangerous precedent for the nation, and that, in a week after a mass shooting, it's so outrageous that the first reaction of this body is to expel me, rather than to pass common sense gun laws, which we were asking for. Our community's in grieving, Nashville is in grieving, and this is their response to grieving. And I think that the nation needs to know and hold those in this chamber accountable.
What's next for you?
I will continue to stand with the people. I'm going to go join the people, and the issues that we're fighting for continue.
Perfectly reasonable. To be honest with you, perfectly reasonable. Continuing on, at 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, in a vote of 65-30, lawmakers failed to pass a motion that would have removed Representative Gloria Johnson, who represented more than about 70,000 Tennesseans in Knoxville. In her defense prior to the vote, Johnson said that she never shouted or pounded the podium or displayed a sign containing a political statement while she was in the well last week, all of which would have been in violation of the House rules. Jesus Christ. Okay. Sure. Fine, again. I don't know, man. It's a bad look. Like, you just had a black man, talk about on the House floor how this is seeming to be racist, seeming to be, anti-democratic. You expel him in a vote of 75-25. Every single Republican voting to expel him. You don't do the same thing for a white woman. What are people supposed to think? Do you give a shit about optics at all? Like, you're just proving his point, aren't you? The cheers erupted in the gallery of the House when the final vote was read aloud. As we went to broadcast, the House had not yet decided the fate of Representative Justin Pearson, according to NPR. So, thank you, Nikki, for getting this up. So, I'm going to put this on the screen. No, I'm not. I'm just going to read it. It's too small to put it on the screen. So, according to the Tennessean, just before 8:30 p.m., Representative Justin Pearson of Memphis, the third member of the so-called Tennessee Three, was expelled by a vote of 69-26. With the expulsion, Republicans removed 2 of the youngest black lawmakers in the General Assembly, further reducing an already small minority caucus. So they voted to expel the 2 black people and not the 1 white woman, giving credence to everything that Justin had said. Great. Maybe it isn't me, is, I believe, kind of the person that, right? Never mind. I don't want to put out people's business. Anyways, Tennessee politics sucks. Blackburn and her friends need to get the fuck out. Worst part is we share a property border on the south end. Luckily, it is the back end of the property, 180 yards away. Security guy is nice, though. Interesting. Well, good to know. Now, this is where I might get in trouble by some progressives here a bit. I am not against expelling people from the legislative body. I'm against it for purely partisan reasons, which this should be clear to everybody. That's exactly what's going on here. But the idea that it is anti-democratic to do so, I don't buy into. I think that if you violate a law, if you violate some measure of decorum, there's certain thresholds. I wouldn't have, expelled these people for a simple protest from the chamber. If they led a riot or something, that would be different, right? This wasn't that. This wasn't January 6th. Okay? Wasn't a mob of people doing a riot. I think that should be warrant an expulsion. I think that Mayor Marjorie Taylor Greene might have never should have been seated in Congress, given her vitriolic statements about a whole number of different things. Right? Representative Gosar, when he reposted that edited intro to Attack on Titan with him murdering him as Jaeger, murdering Titans, and the Titans being the liberal people, the squad, I think that should have been rise to the occasion of potential expulsion, because these are things that we should not think of being acceptable in our leaders. So I am not here to say that we should get rid of expulsion and just let the people, all the people, like the voters, decide. Perfect case in point. George Santos should be expelled from Congress right now. He should not be seating. He lied to his constituents. He committed fraud on multiple occasions, not just with the lying, but with like fraud when it comes to charity organizations, stealing, petty theft, that sort of thing. Still doubling down on the fact that he's like some big shot when everybody knows that he's not. There's no reason that man should be in Congress right now. He committed a fraud on his constituents, and that should be a reason to expel somebody, especially with how much he did. So I'm not going to sit here and say that this is in and of itself, the expulsion in and of itself is an attack on democracy. But I will say that expulsion for purely partisan reasons is. Maybe it isn't me. Thank you for the agreement on that one. This is very much succinct. I agree. It is part of democracy. If you cross that line, this was not a line crosser. Thank you for that. Maybe it isn't me. And with that, that concludes our segment about Tennessee. We got more to cover. Let's see. This one's interesting. So we'll wrap it up with this. So the Associated Press reported on a bill that would have provided free menstrual products in girls' bathrooms in Idaho public schools. But the measure failed in the state house, with at least one Republican lawmaker calling the proposal very liberal to give out free feminine hygiene products in school. Cool. Right. So, wow. All right. Oh, I'm sorry, Tam. I did not see your comments. We'll start this bit over and I'll slice this in. So do you think, hold on a second. All right. Do you think Gloria Johnson wasn't expelled because she's a white woman or because she didn't use the bullhorn? Because if it was partisan, they would have expelled her too, no? I don't know. Possibly, maybe they couldn't justify it as much as that, but given the fact that there was people that are seating now, somebody pissed on another person's chair and that person didn't get expelled, leads me to believe that it was at the very least partisan. And this gives the fact that she wasn't, simply because she didn't like bang on a table or hold a sign or something, leads me to believe that either one, they're like really like, oh well, we can't do this because she's technically right, or it still gives credence to the fact that they expelled two black people and they didn't expel the white woman that was with them. It gives credence to that argument that this was racist as well. I think it's partisan bullshit, but you can't ignore the racial element that is here either. So that's what I think. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on then here. So what's happening in Idaho? Well, this is weird, so let's talk about it. So the Associated Press reported on a bill that would have provided free menstrual products in girls' bathrooms in Idaho public schools. The measure failed in the state house, with at least one Republican lawmaker calling the proposal very liberal to give out free menstrual products in school. A place that women, young women and girls need products in order to prevent embarrassment and just generally take care of themselves. Maybe you forgot it at home. You weren't supposed to start that day or something. Like, how is this very liberal? This is just a body function that should be taken care of by the place. Like, ugh. Okay. Apparently it's very liberal now to provide free hygiene products. So the bill had advanced in March from the House Education Committee with a do pass recommendation. It was expected to cost around $435,000 to install product dispensers and about $300,000 each year to stock them to provide menstrual products for female students in grades 6th through 12th grade, according to the bill's fiscal note. So, first year $735,000, $300,000 after that to keep products on hand. Okay. State budget analyst had forecasted a $1.4 billion tax revenue surplus at the end of the fiscal year. The Idaho Statesman reported. Quote, "It's not a lot of money in the state's budget," Representative Rod Furness, a Republican, told the committee in speaking about the bill. Continuing on, "Today is a step to preserve womanhood, to give it a chance to start right, to not be embarrassed or feel alienated or ashamed, or to feel like they need to stay home from school due to period poverty," which is a very real thing. Period poverty is a very real thing. When it's the difference between eating or keeping the lights on and buying tampons or pads, sacrifices are made, and generally speaking, you're not going to buy period products rather than feed your kids or keep the lights on. So this is a real thing. Now, the state currently pays for toilet paper, paper towels, and soap in public school bathrooms, Furness said. But in schools that don't offer period products for lack of funding, students without their own products must ask teachers, administrators, and friends for help, or simply not to come to school at all, according to bill supporters. There are 59 Republicans in the House and 11 Democrats. 35 Republicans opposed the bill, including Republican Representative Heather Scott, who called it a very liberal policy. Quote, "Why are our schools obsessed with the private parts of children?" What? Are you fucking kidding me? Obsessed with the private parts of children? This is a medical, essentially necessity at this point. We are talking about stopping embarrassment, keeping people, hygienic, keeping them, protected, and you're saying that this is an obsession with private parts? This is providing a tool that is a need and some people can't afford. No, this is fucking nonsense. This is absolutely ridiculous. And how are you a woman saying this bullshit? I don't understand. Jesus fuck. What the fuck? I don't get it, man. And the ridiculousness only continues. Republican Representative Barbara Edhart said phrases such as period poverty and menstrual equity, which were used to describe inaccessibility to menstrual products, were woke terms. Okay. Fine. All right, it's a little bit too progressive-y or whatever. Period poverty? Why are you talking about poverty? Isn't it just periods? Menstrual equity? What is that? Oh my god, woke terms, brain melt. Ugh. Kill me. For the love of God, kill me. Okay. Sure. Maybe it could be called something else. Period poverty is what the research into this issue calls it. Menstrual equity is also another term that is in the research that talks about the fact that some women and girls cannot afford period products, and that causes embarrassment and social economic issues, etc., etc., etc. So we could just say, hey, you know what? Girls in school should be able to just get period products when they need them, no questions asked. Maybe that would have passed the snuff test. But I don't think so. Because the issue here for a lot of people, a lot of Republicans, is paying for it. They don't think that the state should be responsible for anybody, essentially. And we can argue about that all you want. That's where I'm coming from with this. It's the same reason why the idea of a free school lunch to kids that are in school. You're in school for 8 hours a day. You should just be fed. It is a social responsibility. Is a bridge too far because it creates dependence on the state because you're getting welfare while at school. It's fucking nonsense. Now, continuing on, according to the Alliance for Period Supplies Advocacy Group, as of last year, 15 states and the District of Columbia had passed legislation requiring schools to offer free menstrual products to students. Good on those 15 school districts. Or 15 states in the District of Columbia, so 16 areas. Good for them. The Alliance reported that 1 in 4 students who menstruate experience period poverty in 2021, up from 1 in 5 in 2019. A pandemic had a lot of issues, and this is one of them. We know that without period products, these students are more likely to miss school, out of embarrassment and other things. Why would you go to school and want to get made fun of because you can't afford a tampon or a pad and you bleed through your clothes? Like, duh. Obviously, there's going to be people that don't want to deal with that. And before the pandemic, 4 in 5 teens reported either having missed class time or knew a classmate who missed class time because they did not have access to period products. This is why they call it period poverty. And this is the knock-on effects it can have. You miss school for like about a week because you can't afford a period product. Then the truancy court gets involved. CPS gets involved. Like, this is nonsense, dude. This is just something that should be provided at school. The Alliance for Period Supplies and Period.org are working together to advocate for funding to make period products available for free in all schools so that no student misses out on learning for lack of a basic necessity. Going to the comments from the audience here, we have Maybe It Isn't Me saying, quote, "This is so fucking stupid. Beyond it, actually. Take the shit paper away. It's all about the ass after all. Get rid of paper towels. They may be needed to wipe something that touches your privates." To a statement about the whole issues with obsessed with genitalia. It is just ridiculous. It really is. And yeah, I'm sorry, like when stuff like this happens, I cannot believe that both parties are the same. I just can't. We have Republicans right now voting against providing free menstrual products to students. Previously, we had Republicans voting against free school lunches. Like, literally, this is what happens with the school lunch thing, because this is part of the same thing. This is part of the same thing, right? When a student isn't able to pay for a lunch, right? Say they're on reduced meal plan or they don't have a free lunch plan, and they go up to buy their food. Okay, or maybe they don't get paid reduced or free lunch, and they go to get their food. And for whatever reason, mommy and daddy forgot to put money on the card, right? The little cash card that they use to pay for school. What happens to the food once it's taken up there? It's thrown away in front of the child because they can't take it back. And by law in those states, they don't give free lunches. They are mandated to throw it away. How does that make sense? It doesn't. Just like this doesn't make sense. And it's done for the same reason. Can't, man. You can't. Like, this is just a basic thing. Student is in the care of a school for 6 to 8 hours a day. In those 6 to 8 hours a day, they should be fed. They should not have to worry about anything medical, including period products. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the news roundup. All right, let's move on to the economy and labor, because we got some stuff to talk about here. So let's talk about it. And these things are important because they talk about wider geopolitical issues, why inflation might still be an issue, what is happening with the labor markets, etc. We like to cover this often on the news program. So let's get into it. And first up, we're going to talk about OPEC cutting production once again. So a group of oil-producing nations imposed a significant cut in oil output with far-reaching consequences for the U.S. gas prices, industry analysts told ABC News. The alliance of countries known as OPEC Plus, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, agreed on Sunday to cut oil output by 1.2 million barrels per day starting in May, which amounts to removing roughly 1% of oil from the global market. Regardless of the production cuts, prices typically rise in the summer due to spike in demand as cars overtake road trips. Regardless of the production cut, prices typically rise in the summer due to a spike in demand as car owners take road trips and families fly to vacation destinations. The OPEC Plus output decision, however, will send gas prices as much as 30 cents higher per gallon than they would have otherwise spiked, the analysts have said. The announcement from OPEC Plus met with disapproval from the Biden administration. Quote, "We don't think the production cuts are advisable at this moment, giving market uncertainty, and we've made that clear," White House spokesman John Kirby said on Monday. The production cut coincides with an ongoing rise in gas prices. The national average price for a gallon of gas stands at $3.50, which marks a 2% increase over the past week and a 3% spike over the past month, according to AAA data. Average gas prices nationwide remain 20% lower, though, than they were a year ago. Despite the anticipated rise in gas prices as a result of the OPEC Plus production cost, analysts do not expect gas prices to reach the levels on display last summer. As the financial system teeters and the Federal Reserve raises interest rates, a possible global economic slowdown could weaken oil demand and limit the upward effect on gas prices, some analysts have said. Now, we can talk about how OPEC does these things for political reasons, and they do, but they also do it for economic reasons. And they start production cuts prior to their anticipated economic slowdowns. So they did this during the, about 4 or 5 months after the Russia invaded, and that kind of was in line with the global economic slowdown. They did it. They've done it before during recessions where they cut massive output massively to avoid a collapse in prices, a glut in the market. So this isn't anything that is necessarily out of the ordinary or something that is just inherently political. It has political ramifications for us because the United States gas prices go up, president bad. That's how a lot of thinking goes in the US. But it doesn't mean that this is just being done for political reasons. There is the narrative right now, the economic narrative, the global economic outlook is pretty bleak. A lot of people are expecting a recession to hit this year, probably in Q3. So, right when the cuts are about to start, So this isn't, I wouldn't necessarily say this is being driven by Russia's war in Ukraine or anything else like that. I do think this is probably anticipation for a market slowdown. But it does mean that don't be surprised if gas prices go up a bit with that. Let's continue on, though, with some more economic news. And the U.S. is dealing with a crippled banking system now, stubborn high inflation and recession fears, plus OPEC raising prices. But the leader of the nation's largest bank is nonetheless optimistic about the financial outlook, according to reporting from ABC News. In an annual shareholder letter on Tuesday, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, said the resilient consumer spending and a strong job market have buoyed. I'm going to start that whole over. So, in an annual shareholder letter on Tuesday, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, said that resilient consumer spending and a strong job market have buoyed the economy, padding the savings of many households and buttressing them against a possible downturn. Quote, "When one talks about risk for too long, it begins to cloud your judgment. Looking ahead, the positives are huge. Looking ahead, the positives are huge. Consumer balance sheets are in great shape," Dimon added, noting that, quote, "unemployment is extremely low and wages are going up, particularly at the low end," which is where a lot of that wage growth is actually at. We're talking, what was it, just before the pandemic, like I think the average wage for an entry-level worker was about $11 an hour nationally. It's now like 15, right? Like even in Texas, even in Austin, Texas, we see, places like McDonald's offering $16 an hour for some positions, starting $16 an hour. So we're definitely seeing some wage growth there. We're seeing some tamp down from the higher end, but that doesn't squeeze the middle. It actually helps expand the middle when you have the higher end, and the higher end push down a little bit, and then the lower end push up. Meanwhile, though, Americans retain $1 trillion more excess cash in their checking accounts than they held before the pandemic, Dimon said, citing JP Morgan Chase's data. This means that prior to the pandemic, savings weren't great. Even though Americans are spending down their savings they built up during the pandemic, lots of people are sitting on lots of cash. And the reason for that isn't because of the stimulus checks. Now, the stimulus checks helped, but the primary reason for that is people stopped going out all the time and started buying stuff. Once they got all the stuff they needed during the close of the economy globally, they still couldn't travel. They just started accruing cash. And that's what we're seeing here. And those savings have kept consumer spending relatively robust, even as pandemic-era fiscal support fades further into the past. Consumer spending accounts for roughly 2/3 of the entire U.S. economy. Still, though, the bank's measures of excessive savings held by U.S. households has fallen nearly by half since November of 2021, suggesting that Americans have drawn down their accounts to contend with high inflation. Which is probably partially true. It's partially that, definitely dealing with inflation, maybe some layoffs. It's also because pent-up demand just got sucked up. People were going on massive trips, like a lot. I think everybody I know in real life, like, doesn't matter what economic side they're on, right? Whether they're not broke, but not necessarily upper middle class or middle class. Like, a lot of people, like everybody I know, is going on some sort of vacation or doing something in the next couple of weeks. So I think that's part of it too. I think a lot of people have just spent a ton of money recently to treat themselves. Inflation has also fallen significantly from its summer peak, though it remains more than triple the Fed's target of 2%. Disinflation has set in, though. Reporting from Reuters shows that the number of Americans filing new claims from unemployment benefits fell last week as well, but annual revisions to the data showed applications were higher this year than initially thought. Further evidence that the labor market is slowing down. Not slowing down to what the Fed wants. The Fed wants 5% unemployment. We don't want that. No one should want that. That's millions of people out of jobs, right? That's a destroyed, mostly destroyed economy. But it is slowing down. And that might be, it sucks for the people that it's happening to, but a lot of people that are being laid off from like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, like all those people are being hired by smaller companies. So maybe that could be good overall for your economy. Hey, Noble, nice to see you. Furthermore, with today's weekly jobless claims report, the Labor Department updated the methodology used to seasonally adjust the initial claims and the so-called continued claims data. Prior to COVID-19 pandemic, the unemployment insurance claims series used multiplicative factors to seasonally adjust the data. Beginning in March of 2020, that was changed to additive factors before switching back to the previous models as the large effects of the pandemic on the claims series lessened. With the revised figures, jobless claims have surpassed 200,000 for 9 straight weeks, an uptick from last year's record low unemployment figures. Continuing joblessness now sits at 1.82 million, the largest figure since December of 2021. Still, unemployment remains relatively low, 3.6% in February, according to the Labor Department, and employers still struggle to follow open roles. But that, my friends, concludes our segment on the economy. Now, if this is your first time joining the program, you're in for a little treat. We like to end our program with some news of the weird. And in this time, we have real-life snakes on a plane scenario. The New York Post reported a story of a South African pilot who literally forced to make an emergency landing because of a deadly snake on his plane. He needed to get that motherfucking snake off of his motherfucking plane. We were cruising at 11,000 feet in the air when I felt something cold against my hip, the pilot said. The freaked out flyboy had been ferrying 4 passengers on a private flight from Worcester, South Africa, to Mbabala on April 3rd. They would soon realize, however, that they weren't the only passengers on board. They were joined by another. The pilot told the BBC he knew something was wrong after feeling a cool sensation sort of crawling up his shirt. This little guy here. He initially thought he was feeling leakage from his water bottle, but quickly realized that that was not the case after looking down and seeing the cobra receding its head back and underneath the seat. Ooh, wow. That's scary. He recognized this scaly seatmate as Cape Cobra, an aggressive South African dwelling lepid that packs enough venom to kill 9 humans. Quote, I kept quiet for a minute or two because I didn't want the passengers to panic, explained the steel-nerved airman. I informed them that a snake was under my seat in the cockpit and I needed to land the plane as soon as possible. Yeah, that boy was on his leg and he almost died. But with that, my friends, that concludes the news roundup. Thank you everybody so much for joining us. It really does make this all worthwhile. We know you liked what you heard because you're still with us right now, so please smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. I'd like to give special thanks to our producer, Nikki Adams, who writes the copy and helps source a lot of the news stories you saw here, because without her, this program would not be as good or robust as it actually is. We also like to thank our Facebook community who did countless crowdsourcing for us and help, generally makes it a good time by providing some of these news stories. We are, like I said, we are looking to do more debates and the such. So if you want to debate me on an issue, want to talk about an issue, conversation, whatever, you can find us at Crowdsourced Poll on Twitter. And you can also hit me up if you do Mastodon at cspcypher@federated.press. So yeah, everybody, thank you again so much for joining us. It really has been a pleasure. And as we say at Crowdsourced Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.